In the grand theater of human achievement, there exists no scene more dramatic, no plot twist more powerful, no transformation more inspiring than the moment when defeat becomes victory, when failure transforms into triumph, when the darkest hour gives birth to the brightest dawn. This is not the stuff of fairy tales or motivational fantasy. This is the raw, unvarnished reality of how every great life unfolds, how every lasting success is forged, how every legend is born from the ashes of apparent destruction. Every person who has ever risen to greatness has faced a moment when everything seemed lost, when failure appeared final, when the weight of setback threatened to crush not just their dreams, but their very spirit. In these moments, two paths diverge in the woods of human experience. One path leads to permanent defeat, to the graveyard of abandoned dreams, to the bitter acceptance that some people are meant for mediocrity. The other path leads to resurrection, to comeback, to the kind of triumph that transforms not just individual lives, but inspires generations. The difference between these paths is not luck, it's not talent, it's not circumstances or connections or cosmic favor. The difference is something far more fundamental, far more powerful, and infinitely more within your control than any external factor. The difference is understanding the hidden mechanics of setback and comeback, the secret alchemy that transforms poison into medicine, obstacle into opportunity, breakdown into breakthrough. This understanding separates those who are defeated by their setbacks from those who are defined by their comebacks. It distinguishes between those who surrender to circumstances and those who surrender circumstances to their will. It creates the line between those who let failure write their final chapter and those who use failure as the prologue to their greatest chapter. But here's what most people never grasp about the relationship between setback and comeback. The setback is not the enemy of the comeback. The setback is the creator of the comeback. Without the valley, there can be no mountain. Without the wound, there can be no healing. Without the fall, there can be no rise. The very forces that seem to destroy us are the same forces that, properly understood and channeled, become the source of our greatest strength. When Thomas Edison's laboratory burned to the ground in 1914, destroying years of work and millions of dollars in equipment, he could have seen this as the end of his career, the final blow to his legacy, the ultimate setback that no comeback could overcome. Instead, he told his son, "Go get your mother and all her friends. They'll never see a fire like this again." The next morning, he was back at work using the setback as an opportunity to rebuild better, stronger, more efficiently than before. Edison understood something that most people never learn: setbacks are not verdicts. They are not final judgments on your potential or permanent statements about your worth. Setbacks are information. They are feedback. They are the universe's way of asking you a simple but profound question. How badly do you want this? How committed are you to your vision? How willing are you to adapt, evolve, and overcome? Your answer to this question, demonstrated not through words but through actions, determines whether your setback becomes a stepping stone or a stumbling block, whether it becomes the foundation for your comeback or the grave of your dreams. The setback itself is neutral. It carries no inherent meaning, no predetermined outcome, no fixed destiny. The meaning comes from your response. The outcome flows from your decision. The destiny is shaped by your choice. This is the first fundamental truth about turning setbacks into comebacks. You must reframe your relationship with failure itself. Most people have been conditioned to see failure as the opposite of success, as evidence that they lack what it takes, as proof that they should abandon their dreams and accept lesser ambitions. This conditioning is not just wrong. It's catastrophically destructive to human potential. Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the raw material of success. It's the classroom where success is learned, the gymnasium where success is strengthened, the laboratory where success is refined. Every failure contains within it the seeds of future success, but only for those who know how to extract those seeds, plant them properly, and nurture them into new growth. When Walt Disney was fired from a newspaper for lacking imagination and having no good ideas, he faced a choice that would define his entire life. He could accept this judgment as truth, internalize this setback as proof of his limitations, and settle for a life of mediocrity. Or he could use this setback as fuel for his comeback, as motivation to prove his critics wrong, as inspiration to develop the very qualities they claimed he lacked. Disney chose comeback. He used his failure as fertilizer for his future success. Every rejection, every criticism, every setback became raw material for building something greater. His lack of imagination became the foundation for creating the most imaginative entertainment empire in history. His setback became the setup for his greatest triumph. But this transformation from setback to comeback requires something that most people find impossibly difficult: maintaining faith. When faith seems foolish, holding on to vision. When vision seems impossible, believing in yourself when everyone else has stopped believing in you. This is not blind optimism or delusional thinking. This is strategic faith based on understanding how success actually works, how breakthroughs actually happen, how comebacks actually unfold. The second fundamental truth about turning setbacks into comebacks is that comebacks are always built on something that setbacks cannot destroy: your core identity, your fundamental values, your deepest purpose. External circumstances can destroy your business, your relationships, your reputation, your resources, but they cannot destroy who you are at your essence, what you stand for at your core, why you exist at your deepest level. Abraham Lincoln understood this principle when he faced defeat after defeat in his early political career. He lost his first run for the Illinois General Assembly. He failed in business. He was defeated in his bid for the U.S. House of Representatives. He lost his campaign for the U.S. Senate. Each setback could have been interpreted as evidence that he should abandon politics, that he lacked the qualities necessary for leadership, that his dreams were unrealistic. But Lincoln's setbacks could not touch his core identity as a man committed to justice, equality, and the preservation of the Union. They could not destroy his fundamental values of honesty, integrity, and service to others. They could not eliminate his deepest purpose of making America a place where government of the people, by the people, and for the people could endure. These core elements of his being remained intact through every setback, becoming the foundation for his eventual comeback as one of America's greatest presidents. This reveals something crucial about the anatomy of comebacks. They are not built by becoming someone different. They are built by becoming more of who you already are at your best. Setbacks strip away everything that is not essential: the superficial, the temporary, the external. What remains is your authentic self, your true character, your real purpose. Comebacks happen when you build your new life on this unshakable foundation, rather than trying to reconstruct the external facade that circumstances destroyed. But accessing this unshakable foundation requires something that challenges most people more than any external obstacle: brutal honesty about what went wrong, why it went wrong, and what role you played in creating the circumstances that led to your setback. This is not about self-blame or self-punishment. This is about self-awareness and self-responsibility, which are the only paths to self-transformation. Most people facing setbacks spend their energy on blame. Blaming others, blaming circumstances, blaming bad luck or unfair treatment. This blame might feel emotionally satisfying in the short term, but it's strategically disastrous in the long term because it places the power for your comeback in external hands rather than your own hands. If others are responsible for your setback, then others must be responsible for your comeback. If circumstances created your failure, then circumstances must create your success. If luck determined your defeat, then luck must determine your victory. This external focus renders you powerless to create the very comeback you desperately need. You become a victim waiting for rescue rather than a hero writing your own resurrection story. You become dependent on forces beyond your control rather than developing the internal forces that are completely within your control. The third fundamental truth about turning setbacks into comebacks is that you must take complete ownership of both your setback and your comeback. This doesn't mean accepting blame for things that were genuinely beyond your control, but it does mean accepting responsibility for how you respond to everything that happens to you, including things beyond your control. Steve Jobs exemplified this principle when he was fired from Apple, the company he had co-founded and built from a garage startup into a technology powerhouse. He could have spent years in bitterness, resentment, and blame. He could have sued, fought, or spent his energy trying to destroy those who had pushed him out. Instead, he took complete ownership of his situation and used his setback as the launching pad for his comeback. Jobs channeled his energy into creating Next Computer and acquiring Pixar, developing the very skills and perspectives that would eventually make him indispensable to Apple's revival. When Apple acquired Next and brought Jobs back as CEO, he was not the same person who had been fired years earlier. He was a more mature, more strategic, more effective leader who had been forged in the fire of setback and tempered by the discipline of comeback. His setback became the secret ingredient in his comeback. The years away from Apple taught him what he could never have learned by staying at Apple. The pain of being fired motivated him to develop capabilities he might never have developed without that motivation. His greatest professional failure became the foundation for his greatest professional triumph. But this transformation from setback to comeback doesn't happen automatically. It requires conscious choice, deliberate action, and strategic thinking about how to extract maximum value from minimum circumstances. It requires what might be called comeback intelligence. The ability to see opportunity in obstacle, possibility in problem, advantage in adversity. Comeback intelligence begins with understanding that every setback contains hidden gifts that are not immediately visible, but are always present for those who know how to find them. These gifts might be new insights about yourself, your industry, or your approach. They might be unexpected connections with people who can help your comeback. They might be forced innovations that you never would have discovered without the pressure of necessity. They might be character developments that make you stronger, wiser, or more resilient than you were before your setback. When Colonel Sanders was 65 years old, broke, and living on Social Security, most people would have considered his entrepreneurial dreams finished. His restaurant had failed, his savings were gone, his working years were supposedly behind him. But Sanders had developed comeback intelligence over decades of setbacks and recoveries. He understood that his apparent failure was actually preparation for his real success. Sanders took his secret chicken recipe and began driving from restaurant to restaurant, offering to share his recipe in exchange for a small percentage of sales. He was rejected 109 times before finding his first partner. Most people would have quit after 10 rejections. Many would have stopped after 100. Almost everyone would have given up after 1,000. But Sanders understood that each rejection was not a verdict on his recipe or his business model. It was simply a step closer to the right partner who would recognize the value of what he offered. KFC became a global empire not despite Sanders' age and setbacks, but because of them. His years of struggle had taught him resilience. His business failures had taught him what didn't work. His rejections had taught him persistence. His setbacks had prepared him for his comeback in ways that early success never could have. This illustrates the fourth fundamental truth about turning setbacks into comebacks. Timing is not your enemy. Age is not your enemy. Past failures are not your enemy. These apparent disadvantages often become your greatest advantages when you develop the comeback intelligence to leverage them properly. Your setbacks have been preparing you for your comeback even when you couldn't see how. But comeback intelligence also requires understanding the difference between reactive recovery and strategic comeback. Reactive recovery is trying to get back to where you were before your setback. Strategic comeback is using your setback as a launching pad to go further than you ever went before. Reactive recovery focuses on restoring what was lost. Strategic comeback focuses on creating what never existed. Most people settle for reactive recovery because it feels safer, more familiar, more achievable. They want to get their old job back, rebuild their old business, restore their old relationships, return to their old life. But this approach misses the greatest opportunity that setbacks provide: the chance to build something better than what existed before, to become someone stronger than who you were before, to create a life more aligned with your authentic purpose than the life that circumstances disrupted. Oprah Winfrey could have spent her energy trying to reactive recovery after being fired from her first television job for being too emotionally invested in her stories. She could have tried to get rehired to prove she could be less emotional, to return to the traditional model of journalism that had rejected her. Instead, she used her setback as information about what made her unique and built her comeback around that uniqueness rather than trying to eliminate it. Her emotional investment in stories, which had been seen as a weakness in traditional journalism, became her greatest strength in talk show hosting. Her ability to connect personally with guests and audiences, which had been criticized as unprofessional, became the foundation of her media empire. Her setback revealed her authentic strengths and pointed her toward her true calling in ways that continued success might never have done. This reveals the fifth fundamental truth about turning setbacks into comebacks. Your setback often contains the blueprint for your comeback. The very thing that caused your failure might be the key to your future success when properly understood and strategically applied. Your weakness reframed and redirected might become your greatest strength. Your failure analyzed and optimized might become your most valuable teacher. But accessing this blueprint requires something that most people avoid at all costs: deep, honest analysis of what went wrong and why. This analysis is not for the purpose of self-punishment or regret, but for the purpose of extraction. Extracting every possible lesson, insight, and improvement from your setback so that it becomes the foundation for your comeback rather than just the memory of your defeat. This analysis must be both technical and emotional, both strategic and personal, You must understand not just what went wrong, but why you made the decisions that led to what went wrong. You must examine not just the external circumstances that contributed to your setback, but the internal patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting that made you vulnerable to those circumstances. Henry Ford went bankrupt twice before creating the Ford Motor Company that revolutionized transportation and made him one of the richest men in America. Each bankruptcy could have been seen as evidence that he was not cut out for business, that his ideas were flawed, that his dreams were unrealistic. Instead, Ford used each setback as a laboratory for learning, a classroom for improvement, a proving ground for resilience. His first business failure taught him about the importance of efficient manufacturing. His second failure taught him about the necessity of cost control and market positioning. Each setback provided education that no business school could have given him, experience that no amount of theoretical knowledge could have provided, and character development that no success could have created. When Ford finally succeeded with the Model T and the assembly line, his success was not despite his previous failures, but because of them. Every lesson learned in failure became a strategy applied in success. Every mistake made in setback became wisdom deployed in comeback. His failures were not obstacles to his success. They were the very foundation upon which his success was built. This demonstrates the sixth fundamental truth about turning setbacks into comebacks. Preparation and opportunity must converge for comebacks to occur, and setbacks are often the universe's way of forcing the preparation that makes you ready for opportunities you couldn't have handled before. Your setback might be painful, but it's also preparing you for success at a level you never could have achieved without that preparation. But this preparation requires active engagement with your setback rather than passive endurance of it. You cannot simply wait for your comeback to happen. You must actively create the conditions for your comeback by using your setback as motivation for development, as inspiration for innovation, as fuel for transformation. You must become a student of your own failure, a scientist of your own setback, an architect of your own recovery. This active engagement begins with reframing your setback from something that happened to you to something that happened for you. This is not positive thinking or denial of difficulty. This is strategic thinking about how to extract maximum value from challenging circumstances. It's understanding that the universe rarely wastes experiences. Even painful ones usually contain exactly what you need for your next level of growth and success. When Richard Branson's Virgin Cola failed to compete successfully against Coca-Cola and Pepsi, he could have seen this as evidence that he should stick to airlines and music rather than trying to enter established markets dominated by powerful competitors. Instead, he reframed his setback as education about the challenges of competing against entrenched market leaders and used this education to develop better strategies for future ventures. His Virgin Cola failure taught him about brand positioning, distribution challenges, and the importance of finding market niches where Virgin's unconventional approach would be an advantage rather than a disadvantage. This education became invaluable when he entered other markets, helping him avoid similar mistakes and develop more effective strategies for disrupting established industries. Branson's setback became market research that he couldn't have acquired any other way. His failure became competitive intelligence that no consultant could have provided. His defeat became strategic insight that transformed his approach to business development. What appeared to be a waste of time and resources became invaluable preparation for future success. This illustrates the seventh fundamental truth about turning setbacks into comebacks. Every setback is also a setup for something better, but only if you develop the vision to see the setup within the setback. the wisdom to learn from the experience, and the courage to act on what you've learned. Your setback is not just about what you've lost, it's about what you're being prepared to gain. But developing this vision requires something that challenges most people facing setbacks: maintaining hope. When hope seems irrational, believing in possibilities when current reality suggests impossibility, keeping faith in your future when your present seems to argue against it. This is not blind optimism or delusional thinking. This is informed hope based on understanding how comebacks actually work, how life actually unfolds, how success actually develops. Hope is not wishful thinking. Hope is expectation based on understanding. When you understand that setbacks are temporary, that circumstances are changeable, that you have the power to influence your outcomes through your choices and actions, hope becomes rational rather than emotional, strategic rather than sentimental, grounded rather than fanciful. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school varsity basketball team, a setback that could have ended his basketball dreams before they really began. Instead of losing hope, he used this setback as motivation to develop the work ethic, competitive drive, and relentless pursuit of excellence that would eventually make him one of the greatest athletes in history. Jordan understood that his setback was not a verdict on his potential, but a challenge to his commitment. It was not evidence that he lacked talent, but motivation to develop talent through discipline and practice. It was not proof that his dreams were unrealistic, but inspiration to make his dreams inevitable through preparation and persistence. His high school rejection became the foundation of his professional excellence. The pain of being cut became the fuel for countless hours of practice. The embarrassment of not making the team became the motivation for making himself impossible to cut ever again. His setback became the secret ingredient in his comeback. This reveals the eighth fundamental truth about turning setbacks into comebacks. Pain can become power, but only if you choose to transform it rather than just endure it. The energy of frustration can become the energy of determination. The power of anger can become the power of motivation. The force of disappointment can become the force of dedication. But this transformation requires conscious choice and deliberate action. Most people try to avoid the pain of setbacks, to minimize their discomfort, to move past their disappointment as quickly as possible. This is natural and understandable, but it's also strategically limiting because it wastes the motivational energy that pain provides. Pain is not just suffering, it's also fuel. Disappointment is not just discomfort, it's also direction. Frustration is not just difficulty, it's also drive. The most powerful comebacks are often fueled by the most painful setbacks, because pain properly channeled becomes the most powerful motivator available to human beings. The desire to prove wrong those who doubted you, to overcome the circumstances that defeated you, to rise above the limitations that seem to define you. These desires generate energy that can sustain effort through difficulties that would stop less motivated people. But this transformation of pain into power requires something that many people find counterintuitive: embracing your setback rather than trying to escape from it, learning from your failure rather than trying to forget it, using your defeat as motivation rather than trying to minimize its impact. You must be willing to feel the full weight of your setback in order to extract the full power of your comeback. J.K. Rowling was a single mother living on welfare when she began writing Harry Potter. Her setbacks were multiple and overwhelming: divorce, unemployment, poverty, depression, and rejection after rejection from publishers who couldn't see the value in her story. Each setback could have been a reason to give up, to accept that her writing dreams were unrealistic, to focus on just surviving rather than thriving. Instead, Rowling used her setbacks as the raw material for her comeback. Her experience of poverty informed her understanding of struggle. Her depression deepened her empathy for suffering. Her rejection strengthened her determination to succeed. Her setbacks became not just background experiences, but foreground material that made her story more authentic, her characters more real, her success more meaningful. When Harry Potter finally found a publisher and became a global phenomenon, Rowling's success was not despite her setbacks, but because of them. Her struggles gave her story depth. Her pain gave her writing power. Her setbacks gave her comeback authenticity that resonated with millions of readers who saw their own struggles reflected in her journey. This demonstrates the ninth fundamental truth about turning setbacks into comebacks: authenticity amplifies impact. When your comeback is built on real experience of real setbacks, it carries a power and credibility that manufactured success can never match. Your scars become your credentials. Your wounds become your wisdom. Your failures become your foundation for helping others avoid similar failures or overcome similar setbacks. But authenticity requires vulnerability. The willingness to be honest about your struggles, open about your failures, transparent about your journey from setback to comeback. This vulnerability is not weakness but strength, not exposure but connection, not risk but opportunity to inspire others who are facing similar struggles. When you share your setback to comeback story authentically, you do more than just document your own journey. You provide hope for others who are currently in setback mode. You offer proof that comebacks are possible. You demonstrate that setbacks are not final. You become living evidence that circumstances can change, that defeats can become victories, that endings can become beginnings. This leads to the 10th fundamental truth about turning setbacks into comebacks. Your comeback is not just for you. It's for everyone who needs to see that comebacks are possible, that setbacks are not permanent, that giving up is not the only option when circumstances become difficult. Your personal transformation becomes social inspiration. Your individual comeback becomes collective hope. Understanding this larger purpose of your comeback adds meaning to your struggle and motivation to your recovery. You're not just rebuilding your own life, you're demonstrating that life can be rebuilt. You're not just overcoming your own obstacles, you're proving that obstacles can be overcome. You're not just achieving your own success, you're expanding everyone's sense of what's possible. This sense of larger purpose transforms your comeback from personal ambition to social contribution, from individual achievement to collective inspiration. It adds depth to your motivation and sustainability to your effort because you're working not just for yourself, but for everyone who will be encouraged by your example. Arnold Schwarzenegger's comeback from bodybuilding to Hollywood to politics became more than just personal career transitions. Each comeback demonstrated that boundaries could be crossed, that limitations could be transcended, that people could reinvent themselves completely regardless of their starting point or previous identity. His comebacks became permission for others to attempt their own comebacks. When Schwarzenegger transitioned from bodybuilding to acting, critics said his accent was too thick, his body too muscular, his background too foreign for Hollywood success. When he transitioned from acting to politics, critics said his Hollywood background disqualified him from serious political consideration. Each transition could have been seen as impossible, each setback as final. But Schwarzenegger understood that comebacks are not about meeting existing expectations. They're about exceeding existing limitations. He didn't try to become what Hollywood expected. He became what Hollywood had never seen before. He didn't try to fit political conventions. He created new political possibilities. His comebacks succeeded because they transcended rather than conformed to conventional boundaries. This reveals the 11th fundamental truth about turning setbacks into comebacks. The most powerful comebacks don't just restore what was lost, they create what never existed before. They don't just return you to your previous position, they elevate you to a new level entirely. They don't just solve the problem that caused your setback, they transform you into someone who creates solutions for similar problems. But this transformation requires something that distinguishes great comebacks from merely adequate recoveries: the willingness to use your setback as a catalyst for becoming more than you were before, not just different from who you became during your setback. It requires seeing your setback not just as something to overcome, but as something to learn from, grow through, and be transformed by. This transformation happens when you ask not just, how can I get back to where I was, but who do I need to become to ensure this setback never happens again? It happens when you focus not just on changing your circumstances, but on changing yourself in ways that make better circumstances inevitable. It happens when you use your setback as motivation for evolution, not just recovery. The final and most important truth about turning setbacks into comebacks is that the comeback begins the moment you decide it begins. It doesn't wait for circumstances to improve. It doesn't depend on external conditions changing. It doesn't require other people's permission or approval. It begins with a decision. The decision to stop accepting your setback as your final destination and start treating it as your launching pad. This decision is not just intellectual but emotional, not just mental but spiritual, not just personal but purposeful. It's the decision to believe in possibilities that current circumstances seem to deny. It's the decision to work for outcomes that current evidence doesn't support. It's the decision to become someone that current limitations suggest you cannot become. But once this decision is made, once this commitment is established, once this transformation begins, the comeback becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Not because circumstances guarantee success, but because you become the kind of person who creates success regardless of circumstances. Not because setbacks disappear, but because you develop the ability to transform any setback into the foundation for your next comeback. Every setback you have ever faced, every failure you have ever experienced, every defeat you have ever endured has been preparing you for this moment. The moment when you choose comeback over surrender, transformation over resignation, possibility over limitation. Your setbacks have not been punishments for your ambition, they have been preparation for your elevation. The question is not whether you have the ability to create a comeback. You do. The question is not whether you deserve a comeback. You do. The question is whether you will choose to begin your comeback now with whatever resources you have from wherever you are, despite whatever circumstances currently surround you. Your comeback is not waiting for perfect conditions. It's waiting for your commitment. Your comeback is not waiting for external permission. It's waiting for internal decision. Your comeback is not waiting for circumstances to change. It's waiting for you to change in ways that make circumstances irrelevant to your success. The setback that brought you to this moment was not your ending. It was your beginning. It was not your defeat. It was your preparation. It was not evidence that you should give up. It was proof that you are ready to step up. Your setback has been setting you up for the comeback that will define not just your future, but your legacy. If these words have awakened something within you, if this message has transformed your relationship with your setbacks, if this understanding has ignited the fire of comeback in your soul, Then share this transformation with others who need to understand that setbacks are setups, that failures are foundations, that every ending is actually a beginning in disguise. Subscribe to join the community of comeback creators who understand that setbacks are not verdicts but opportunities, that defeats are not destinations but detours, that every fall is preparation for a rise that exceeds anything that came before. Because your comeback is not just about you, it's about everyone who will be inspired when they see that comebacks are possible, that setbacks are temporary, that the human spirit is ultimately undefeatable. Your comeback begins now. Your setback ends now. Your transformation starts now. The only question is, how great will your comeback be?